Welcome to part 6 of this 4-wheel underground solid axle swap on a 3rd generation Toyota 4Runner. In this part, we are going to show you how to weld on the reinforcement plates on the front of the frame rails. We're going to show you how to mount the steering box. And finally, we're going to show you how to install the 4-wheel underground engine mounts. This is an episode that you really should watch, especially for the engine mounts, because we did run into some problems that you should know about before you go to install your engine mounts, because there were some major problems that you will see towards the end of the video. With all that said, let's get started with this episode.
All right, as you can see, we got this driver's side frame plate mocked up. Really want to just center it on this hole and then kind of make the bottom edge straight with the frame. That'll get you pretty much where you're gonna need to go. I had to shave a little corner off this just so I didn't have to cut too much into the body mount, but I did shave the body mount flat with the frame. And then I'm gonna go ahead and mark these holes out where I need to drill. I just need to notch the frame up here, but these two I'm gonna need to drill. And just another quick tip, these clamps are super helpful for stuff like this. I got a 4-pack variety for like 40 bucks. They work really good. We'll throw a link down in the description for these. All right, I got these holes marked out on the frame with some Sharpie. Just kind of got the bottom edge on this one because I'm gonna have to notch the frame a little bit. But essentially, we gotta install these tubes so that the frame doesn't get crushed by tightening these bolts when securing the steering box to the frame. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and do some center punches, try to get it right in the middle. I'm gonna use a fresh drill bit. I'm gonna go in with a smaller drill bit first, and then I'll enlarge it to the right size. This one I don't like, I'll also have to drill it at an angle. Okay, well, I think I'm gonna do the other hole from the other side. I'm gonna take the radiator out. It might be a bit easier, just because this edge will make the hole crooked because I need to go in at an angle. I'd rather just get it from the other side. But this one, now I'm gonna use a 1/2" bit to get this hole finished out. And then I'll probably get the frame notched out right up here. So then I can have 2 bolt holes to hold the other side on. Then I'll be able to successfully mark the 3rd hole from the other side. All right, so let's get this hole drilled out, 1/2". Now that I got that hole drilled out, just gonna clean it up real quick. And I got this slick little drill guide. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna try to just line this hole up, then I'll clamp this drill guide down, and then I'll be able to just drill through to the other side. I have more confidence lining the back of the drill bit up. Oh yeah, there's way less wiggle room lining the back of the drill bit up. That seems super straight to me. All right, put the drill guide in place. I'm gonna go ahead and drill this 1/2" all the way through to the other side. That looks super straight. I'm really happy with that. Okay, so that's gonna be a good guide for the other side. Okay, and then I marked the frame, I think right here. So basically, this tube wants to sit right here, kind of embedded in the frame a little bit. We're gonna have to notch the frame out ever so slightly for this tube. I just got the frame plate clamped back up after I drilled that first hole. Just kind of wanted to see, seems like I'm gonna have to notch into the frame maybe like 1/4 of an inch on the top to kind of get that to sit where I want it to. Got that marked out, I just gotta figure out the depth. Okay, kind of hard to see, but I got the top sleeve marked out in the frame. So I'm gonna go ahead and try to cut the lines with the Sawzall and then maybe try to trim it up with a Dremel or something. I'm not really sure how I'm gonna get that, but we'll get it done. Sure, there's a much better way to do this, but it's the idea that I had, I guess. It's not perfect, but I think we can make that work. I think the Dremel is working better. might have cut a little bit too far, but That's all right, because I'm gonna weld these tubes to the back of this, so I'm gonna need a little bit extra clearance right there anyways for the weld. I think the backside actually ended up perfect. I'm gonna go ahead and get the radiator out. I don't think you guys need to watch that. All right, you can see I've got the radiator out now. So now I'm gonna drill this hole out in the other side to 3/4. That way this tube can slide through the frame. And what I will do with that is then I'll be able to line this hole up on the other side with this frame plate basically. Since I'll have 2 holes lined up on this side, then I'll be able to locate that 3rd hole and drill it from the other side. So here we go. Okay, so just gonna take a little bit of more reaming out and we'll be able to get that. I'm gonna go to the other side, drill the inner hole. All right, there we go. Okay, now you can kind of see what I'm talking about. I ended up tightening the frame plate on the other side with these bolts with the tubes because these holes are a little oversized. What I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna try to get this plate centered on these tubes, and then I'll be able to mark the center of this hole and drill it from this side. You'll see I'm gonna weld these tubes to this frame plate, and then we'll be able to just kind of slide the frame plate with these tubes through the frame, and then I'll weld the tubes up on this side and then weld this frame plate over the welded tubes. Let me get this hole marked out and get that drilled out as well. All right, so same thing as the other side. I just got that hole drilled out to 1/2 inch. The back side of the drill bit slides through just perfect. So I'm gonna go ahead and drill this through the frame just like the other side, and then I'll enlarge the hole to 3/4 and kind of go up a little bit more just to give it a little bit of wiggle room. All right, so drilling the hole from this side didn't really work as good as I planned. In hindsight, I would have just drilled the hole from the outside of the frame and kind of just traced the outside of this tube and then just dremeled out up until I got to the size this tube needs to be. That's kind of what I ended up doing anyways, and got the job done. I'll weld these tubes to the other frame plate, then put the frame plate up, weld it to the frame, and then after I did that, I'll weld this over everything, and that should be super stout. One other quick thing to note. All right, I got this all cleaned up. I got the tube beveled really good, and I'm gonna weld this to this frame plate and then weld the other two. And once it's all welded up, I'll show you what it looks like. There's the frame plate. Probably gonna try to grind this up a little bit, clean it up so it'll fit better on the frame. Get this back on the frame. After a bit of persuasion with a Dremel and a band file, I got these holes how I wanted them. I had to grind down these welds a little bit on this. Definitely was holding it back from sitting flush on the frame. But now I got it how I want it, and I got the frame all marked up, and I'm gonna get this frame cleaned up and weld these frame plates on. Here we go. All right, we got the frame plates mounted to the frame, just about ready for welding. This frame plate right here, you kind of got to bend it to the frame a bit to conform to the way that the frame is shaped. That's why there's 4 clamps on there, so that it's real nice and tight to the frame. I think I'm happy with how this is turning out. We'll get this welded up. Then we'll get the other side of this frame plate welded up where the steering box mounts. There's another plate that goes on the other side. All right, as you can see, I got like a pretty rough sketch going right there. That is basically how much you're gonna have to cut out for the steering box to mount right there. So I kind of just measured from this hole, measured from that hole, measured from that hole to the top of the steering box, and that's about the number that I got right there. So I think it was like 8 inches from that hole, 6 3/4 from that hole, 9 1/4 from that hole to the top of the steering box. Roughly, maybe I kind of gave it a little extra wiggle room. The frame flexes, the body flexes, more a little extra space. I'm either gonna drill out the spot welds along this piece, or I'm just gonna cut it here and then kind of cut it along that, because that's some thicker metal right there, and it seems like it might be helping support the core support, but we'll see once we get the frame plate welded up and the steering box mounted. Then we'll have a better idea of what's going on. Alright, with that cut out, I should be able to A, get a little bit better of an idea of if there's any more that I need to cut out over in this area. And then B, that nice thing about cutting that out is now I'll be able to weld in here on the inside. That's why I cut that out before I really even started welding the frame plate. Alright, I got it all finished up, but I'm just gonna kind of clean it up a little bit more, clean some of the slag up. Probably need to grind that spot right there just a tiny bit to get the steering box to sit nice in there, but we'll do that later. I just need to get the paint on it to protect it from the rust, because we are working outside and we're by the coast. It doesn't look perfect, but I think it's gonna stick on there pretty dang good. Alright, I got the inside all mocked up. I welded these tubes to the frame behind this plate, and so I kind of had to bevel the inside of this plate to be able to fit around the welds a little bit better. Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and weld this whole plate up, make sure to grind this nice and smooth, and maybe kind of drill out the hole in case any weld spatter or anything gets in the holes. Let's get this thing welded up. Okay, and on the passenger side, just like the driver's side, kind of get this hole lined up with this hole pretty even, and then you get the bottom of the frame plate kind of lined up with the bottom of the frame so it's straight. Same thing on the other side again. We're gonna get this one in there, and then when we put a clamp on here, it'll suck it to the frame. This side is gonna be a lot easier than the driver's side, that's for sure. And it's kind of nice, he makes it so your VIN can stay on the frame. We'll see if I can weld good enough to keep the details. Now we're gonna clean up the frame and clean up the brackets, and then should be able to get these things welded on.
So Chris is gonna get a lot of sanding in with the Milwaukee die grinder with the sanding disc. He's gonna clean up all the areas of the frame where he's gonna weld, and also clean up the edges of the plates so he gets nice welds. All right, we have the frame cleaned up, we have the two frame plates cleaned up, and Chris has the plates attached with a bunch of C-clamps, and now he's gonna tack it in place, and then he can remove the C-clamps and get to welding the whole thing. This is a lot of welding. Chris has it all tacked in place. Now he's ready to do a whole lot of welding. Okay, here's all the welding. Chris shared the weld and let me do some of the welding. If you see an ugly weld, it's probably mine. The welding turned out really well. There's no way this plate's gonna come off, and it's gonna support the frame really well. Are you happy?
Getting there, one step at a time. Oh, I just got the frame painted with some primer, some metal etch primer by Rust-Oleum, and now I'm gonna show you how I paint the inside of the frame, because A, the tubes that go through the frame right there, there, and there are all bare metal on the inside. Also, when you're doing the welding, it kind of burns the paint off of the inside of the frame. So I got a special trick. I use this internal frame coating by Eastwood, and then it comes with this long spray can nozzle, and I'll show you how I do that right now. Kind of blew the frame out with the air compressor too, just to kind of get all the loose paint flakes out of there to give it a better surface to bond to. It's kind of a barrier in the frame right here. So there's a hole on the other side of the barrier that you got to get this area from, but otherwise you should be able to get most of the frame from right here. Kind of just spray and pull it back. This is definitely a messy job, so wear clothes that you don't like, lay down some paper towels if you're doing it inside or whatever. And then last little trick, these tips are kind of expensive. I think they're like 15 or 20 bucks a piece. So what I do is take a spray nozzle and blow it out. All right, well, just stumbled upon my first kind of issue This is kind of like a main support right here for the body mount and the core support. Because of my 1-inch body lift, it's really pushing the steering box. You can see here, I still have to move this about like an inch this way, maybe a little bit more than an inch. So I'm gonna have to cut a hole through the core support, but since the 1-inch body lift raised the core support, it's gonna eat into this really bad. So I'm thinking I'm just gonna bite the bullet and remove my 1-inch body lift. I wanted to do that anyways, but kind of was just being lazy, didn't want to remove it, but now I have to remove it. So hopefully that'll kind of make it so it'll be more on the top, and I'll just cut a hole in that area. Basically, this is right on the other side of where the steering box is, and I'm probably gonna have to like basically enlarge this hole. Once I remove that body lift, it'll make it a lot cleaner of a setup for sure. So I'm gonna go ahead and remove the body lift and figure out how to cut this sheet metal in a semi-clean way to mount the steering box. Okay, so here's the hole. It's pretty big in the core support. Kind of just took a Dremel and a burr bit and sort of slowly ate at it, and then my band file took away material, test fitted it, took more material and test fitted it until I was happy with how the steering box was fitting in there and all the bolt holes lined up. The frame plates are pretty much done. We can mount the steering box now. This 4-wheel underground frame plate kit pushes the steering box as far forward as possible, making more room for tire clearance. This is why we needed to cut a hole in the core support to push the steering an additional 3 inches further forward. Okay, so this is the 4-wheel underground engine mount kit. This basically allows you to raise your engine up to about 1.5 inches. That way you can gain more clearance between the front differential pumpkin and the oil pan. And so you will need these cast mounts. The 5EZ did come with 2 different style of engine mounts that connect the block to the engine mount. You need the cast ones to go with this kit because the stamped steel ones have a different angle, and so they won't mount up to this kit. You might have to source these if you don't have them. So let's get to installing. Essentially, we're just gonna take some measurements just to see where we're at. This doesn't really mean much, but it's a reference point so we know about how much we lifted the engine.
So you're just measuring from the ground
to the drain plug. Yeah, so we got 30 and 5/8. Another quick thing to mention, the O2 sensor is pretty tight to the floor pan right here. And so I kind of just took a pry bar and a hammer and I kind of just dented the metal in a little bit to make room for the O2 sensor. And that's the only thing that I think needs clearancing. We'll see as we lift the engine up, I guess. We got more of these little pipe stands, so basically we're gonna probably just try to lift it up right here at the bell housing.
So right now we currently have the engine mount disconnected from the frame bracket on both sides. Chris is just going to start turning the knob there and start raising the whole engine and transmission assembly. We were trying to lift the engine just with the jack stand, but it's pretty hard, so we're doing it another way now. We're using a hydraulic jack, the Pro Eagle, with a 2x4 to another piece of wood that is going to disperse the load under the oil pan. You wouldn't want a very narrow thing like the end of a 2x4 pushing up against the bottom of the oil pan because you're most likely going to crease it. But when you disperse the load over a wider patch, then you're not going to damage the oil pan. So we're going to jack it up, and then we're going to screw the jack underneath it to support the engine and the transmission once we get it to the height we want. Feel resistance?
Now there's resistance for sure.
Okay, so you're probably hitting the...
Yeah.
Well, the hood's not all the way closed either, dude. We have to close the hood.
But I think that it's probably what's hitting is the exhaust.
The exhaust is hitting?
And this O2 sensor is definitely hitting now too.
I'm gonna take a look underneath the hood. Yeah, it's definitely hitting. I couldn't even release the hood.
Oh, really?
Because it was under so much tension.
So we were at 30 and 5/8 to the drain plug. Now we're at 32.
We need to close this hood all the way because it was cracked open, you know?
Maybe what we should do is lower the whole engine. We're gonna close the hood all the way. And then I'll jack it up to like basically it's hitting the hood, or you see the hood start to like bulge up. And then we'll take a measurement here and we'll reduce it by like 1/4 of an inch.
Okay, it's closed.
Okay, watch the hood.
Yep, so you see that movement?
Yep. So I think what we want to do is we'll take a measurement now. We'll see where we're at. 3/8 plus 3/8. So we got about 3/4 of an inch of lift at the drain plug.
This bracket that holds the throttle cable and a vacuum hose is hitting, so we're gonna take that off and just see if we can get a little more lift, because we can fashion something else to hold those two things and not have it impinging on the hood. You could also remove some of that insulation. You think that was what was causing the bulging, just that pushing up? It might
Yeah,
be.
because that's right where it was. It was
Yeah.
probably hitting this fucking thing right there. Okay, now let's try.
Close it again.
I mean, it was right here, and that's right where it was getting bulged at.
Okay, so start jacking up. Let's see where it goes now. I saw a little movement
Yeah,
already.
I just saw it too. I mean, it's hitting the fucking pulley.
It's hitting the pulley.
Yeah.
Oh,
I'm gonna want to probably clearance around that regardless, though.
so you get the idea of what we're trying to do here. We're trying to get the engine as high as possible without hitting the hood. And so right now the pulley for the supercharger is contacting the hood. It seems to be the first thing that's contacting. So we're gonna have to work at this for a while and just figure out what we're gonna do.
We got the hood closed, and the thing that's coming the closest to the hood is the supercharger pulley. And I kind of just got the tip of my pinky's width between the hood and the pulley. And so now that's pretty much as high as I feel comfortable raising the engine.
So Chris is just reaching up in between the engine and where the radiator would be, and he's feeling with his fingers the amount of gap between the supercharger pulley and the hood, and that's how we set the height of the engine. If we go much higher, then when the engine torques from a hard load, it could run into the hood. So we're trying to give ourselves about, what, about a 1/4 inch of clearance?
Maybe even a little bit less.
Okay, maybe a little less than a 1/4 inch. And because he's going to be using poly engine mounts, those things are pretty stiff. They're not going to give that much. So even in a hard torque situation where he's four-wheeling, kind of stuck on some boulders, and he's going hard in reverse or drive, he's probably not going to get the engine to touch the hood. At least that's what we're hoping. So now that we have the height of the engine where we want it, we're gonna remove the old engine brackets off of the engine, and then we're gonna put on the other brackets that are the cast ones for this project. And after we get these out of the way, we're gonna cut the frame brackets off with some angle grinders and whatever we feel is gonna work, and then clean up the metal, get the replacement engine brackets onto the block, and then we'll have to figure out where we're gonna be welding on the frame brackets that come with the 4-wheel underground kit.
And I'm just using my M18 Milwaukee impact gun to get most of these bolts out.
If you wanted more detail on how to remove these engine mounts, you could check out a couple different videos. We have our 5VZ engine replacement video series. We have our engine mount and transmission mount videos. So we'll put links in the video description to both of those. For this passenger side, the AC bracket goes over the top of the bottom right corner of the engine mount bracket. We're gonna work at this for a little bit and see what we have to do to be able to get the engine bracket and the mount attached to it out.
Okay, so this is basically the stamped steel one that I was talking about. These supposedly won't work with these engine mounts because the angle right here, and so that's why we need to swap them to the cast ones. Now that we got this removed, we're gonna start cutting the frame mount for the engine mount with sawzalls and grinders.
But before we do that, I'm gonna work on getting the driver's side mount out. So now that we have the engine mount brackets cut off the frame most of the way, now we're gonna finish cleaning it up with some sanding discs on our Milwaukee angle grinders.
Yeah.
What Chris and I just discovered is there is a difference for the AC compressor bracket when it uses the stamped metal engine mount bracket and the cast bracket. With the stamped metal bracket, that bracket is thinner, and thus the one corner of the AC bracket is gonna have a more extended boss on the top back corner. So what we determined we have to do is we have to take the AC bracket off of the block and then cut it down by the difference in thickness and then put it back on to make it work. So that's an extra step that we didn't anticipate, but it's going to be necessary because there are different AC brackets. The one that pairs up with the cast engine mount bracket is different than the one that pairs up with the stamped steel bracket because they're majorly different in thickness. So we're working on getting the AC bracket disconnected from the block right now. He just got it out. Good job.
So this is the one we got to chop down. On the other bracket, it's pretty much flush on this right here. Take some measurements and then we'll start grinding it down.
So like we mentioned, we're going to take a comparison. We're taking a measurement of the two pieces, the AC bracket and the original engine mount bracket, and then figure out how much we need to take off of that original AC bracket to be able to fit the thicker cast bracket, because the cast bracket is quite a bit thicker. So now he's going to take the measurement with the cast bracket with the original AC bracket and get that value, and then we'll know how much we need to take off of that AC bracket to make it work.
So 35.5 minus 28.
7.5 millimeters?
7.5 millimeters.
You want to double check those measurements before we start grinding?
Yeah, but let me just look to see what 7.5 looks like.
Does it look like it's pretty much, you would take it flush?
Yeah, it's pretty much almost exactly flush.
Okay, so we basically have to take that protrusion off the backside of that one boss. Chris was able to grind down the AC bracket to make it match up to the same thickness of the previous combo, and now he's getting the cast bracket onto the block. Okay, I got the one on the driver's side tightened up, and sounds like Chris might have stripped one of the ones on the passenger side. These brackets that come with the 4-wheel underground kit do require some welding before we use them on the vehicle. You can see that they're bent into the correct position, but there's areas that we need to weld to strengthen them, basically on both sides. So we're going to do that for each of these brackets. We've got both of the brackets welded up. Now we're gonna do the fitment onto the engine and frame to figure out where we need to weld the brackets onto each frame rail. So he's just connecting up the poly mount in between the frame bracket that we have to figure out where we're gonna weld to the frame rail, and the other bracket that attaches the mount to the bracket that we attach to the engine block. All right, we have the frame brackets in place. We got some C-clamps holding them against the frame. So this is the passenger side, and this is the driver side. We're gonna tack them on and then remove the bushings and finish the welds. And with the way we are gonna mount them to the frame, we didn't get the full 1.5 inch of lift that has been reported by other people. Because of the supercharger being a little bit taller and he has a sport hood with a hood scoop, we could only get about 1 inch, and that's about as best we can do, because when we reach up there with our hand, the supercharger pulley is really close to hitting the hood scoop. So this is about as much as we can get with this setup with the supercharger and the sport hood scoop. All right, we're gonna get tacking. We have both of the frame brackets welded to the frame. We primered them and painted them, and now we're going to get ready to install the poly bushings on both sides. And this is the one on the passenger side. So we're going to jack up under the oil pan again and get the engine lifted a little bit more, and also shifted back over towards the passenger side so we can get those poly engine mounts in. What we didn't tell you when we welded in those engine mounts and we're getting ready to attach the poly mounts between the block brackets and the frame brackets is we found that we had to cut down the 4-wheel underground frame brackets in order for them to work to support the engine. And that should have been our first clue that something was off. And we should have put a call into Brian at 4-wheel underground and got his advice, but we didn't do that, and we just went ahead and chopped down those mounts to make it work. And then realized after the fact that that was a really big mistake. And then Chris had to order some new 4-wheel underground engine mount frame brackets so he can redo it. So he had to cut off those brackets that we spent all that time mocking up and welding, and he has to weld on new ones after we spread the frame like we show in the next scene. So right now, Chris is setting up a porta jack on the inside of the frame rails because we discovered a problem that we didn't know was a problem until we ran into it. When we were setting up the panhard bar for the front axle, we noticed that we couldn't center the axle on the frame because the frame rails had collapsed a little bit on their own. Did that happen when we cut out the two front cross members? Did it happen when Chris welded on the reinforcements on either side of the frame rails? It's hard to say. When Chris welded on those reinforcement plates, the engine mounts were disconnected. Now, would that have stopped the frame from collapsing in a little bit? We figured it's about 1/4 inch on either side that it shrunk inward. So we don't really know because it's just guesswork at this point. So what we're gonna try to do with the porta jack is spread out the frame rails to where we can get the frame to where it needs to be. The way we know that the frame rails collapsed in together is we took some measurements from the frame rails on my 3rd generation 4Runner, and we realized that they had collapsed in about 1/4 inch on either side. So we're about 1/2 inch off. So our goal with the porta jack is to spread the frame out a little bit further than 1/2 inch, and then hopefully when it relaxes to the right dimension. So this is going to be a little bit of trial and error. And hopefully this is going to be good knowledge for you to where you're not going to repeat the same mistakes we made. All right, so here comes the porta jack trying to spread it like it's a high school girl on her prom night. All right, so we discovered that there's quite a bit of spring back from the frame, so we have to spread that thing out quite a bit more to where when it relaxes, it comes up with the value we're looking for. So here we go again. Porta jack this. I think I want to get back here, just get out of the path of danger here. Want to take a measurement?
Yeah.
Chris and I messed around with trying to spread the frame enough with the porta jack a little bit more forward, but we learned that the frame would just have memory and want to spring back. We went an extra step and took the oil pan off so we can get the porta jack back further, more central on the frame reinforcements on the outside of the frame rail, hoping that if we spread it closer to the center, we would get a more sustaining spread of the frame where it doesn't want to spring back. We got it spread about 7/8 past where we want it, and we're hoping that once we release it, it's gonna end up at the distance we want. So we're gonna release it and we'll see what we get. Okay, let's take a measurement and see where we're at.
Right there?
Yeah. Sheesh.
I might have gone too far, brother. No, I think it's perfect if I'm being honest.
Perfect? No way. Come on now.
Yeah, dude.
Come on now.
Is that right there?
Don't tease me.
We're like 31 and 15/16. An extra 16th I'm not mad about because it probably had an extra 16th between the plate and the frame. A 32nd on both sides.
We actually did it?
I think so. And let's check the back one. Let's just check the back to see.
Okay, hold on.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're fucking dialed, dude. Let's check up here.
Okay.
Because this is where the panhard bracket.
Where was this measurement?
That's about the same, yeah. So I think we're dialed, dude.
Wow.
I think we got it, guys.
That was a huge pain in the ass. We're gonna get the oil pan back on and keep on plugging along. All right, this episode is complete. And one of the main things we want you to take away from this episode is do yourself a favor and take a measurement of your frame rails, the distance between them. So once you cut out those cross members and you do all that reinforcement welding of the frame plates at the front of the frame rails, you're gonna be able to know, did the frame rails collapse inward? Did they expand outward? You're gonna wanna know that before you set up your engine mounts. So hopefully you watched this episode before you started cutting up your frame and you know 100% that your frame rails didn't move and you're all good to go to get your engine mounts welded in the proper spot. A good suggestion that Chris came up with is maybe before you start cutting those cross members out and weakening the front of the frame, if you could come up with something to put between the frame rails so they can't collapse in, and also when you're welding and maybe you get the frame rails too hot, they can't collapse in and they can't extend out. So maybe you could put a 2x4 between the frames, and then maybe you could wrap the frame with a ratchet strap so it can't really collapse in and it can't extend out, so it maintains the position of the frame rails while you're doing all these heavy alterations to it. But definitely something that you should do when welding those reinforcement plates to the outsides of the front of the frame rails is weld it incrementally. So do a weld on one side, jump to the other side, do a weld, and don't just go to town and weld like a foot. Like weld a few inches, stop, let the frame rail cool, and then weld another section. But jumping back and forth from one frame rail to the next is a good way to go. But if you're pretty fast at welding, you could end up overheating the metal, and then it will deform and cause you problems like we found. We're just trying to impart some good information for you in regards to the front of the frame rails so you could potentially avoid the whole debacle that we had with having to spread the frame out once we realized that the frame had collapsed inward. So there it is there. Join us in part 7 where we are going to get the axle under the front of the vehicle. We're going to get the lower link mounts set up on the insides of the frame rail. We're going to get the drag link connected, the tie rod connected, and everything mocked up to where we can start getting that axle properly set up on the front of the rig. You will also see us welding on the plates under the front axle that support the PSC hydraulic ram. And we are also going to show the building of the transmission skid plate and installing it, because we have to cut out the original transmission cross member to make room to install the lower link brackets on the frame. So we are going to cover the building and installation of the transmission skid plate in that episode also. Peace out, happy wrenching, happy solid axle swapping, bye-bye.